As promised, moving on, folks. Moving on down from Georgia to the state of Florida. Although technically not exactly the state of Florida, but I am talking about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. It has been spectacular, something that I have loved every second of as a resident of the state of Florida, watching Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign go down in flames, worse than the last Florida Republican governor to run for president, Jeb Bush. I think at this point, Ron DeSantis is envious of how successful Jeb Bush's campaign was compared to his. But what's really funny to me is that a report came out this week from Republicans in office, Republicans who've either served with DeSantis in his administration in Florida or Republicans who served with him in the House of Representatives. And according to them, the crash and burn of DeSantis' presidential campaign is not surprising at all. They fully thought this is exactly how it was going to go because he's such a weird and non-personal kind of guy. Let me read you a couple. This is from the Washington Post via Raw Story. Interviews with more than 30 people in Florida and Washington who worked closely with DeSantis, many of whom spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe their interactions with him, indicate that expectations were lower among some who knew him closely in Tallahassee, and that they always expected the candidate to be the challenge. In interviews, Florida Republicans described an aloof governor who believed in sticks and no carrots, according to a senior Florida official, and whose idea of negotiating was, quote, my way or the highway, in the words of another. An insular governor who infrequently talked to some senior members in his own cabinet, including his top law enforcement officials or other leading Republicans. A congressman who seemed to avoid any opportunity to make friends with others in the delegation. To put it another way, it's not DeSantis' horrendous policies down here in Florida that are tanking his campaign. It's him. I don't want to quote Taylor Swift, but he's the problem. It's him. People don't like you because you don't like people. We've all seen the videos of DeSantis and he's wiping his nose and then he's shaking people's hands and it's weird and the pudding stories are gross. But deep down, this is a guy who wants the power of being in a position like being governor or being president, but he doesn't want to have to do the work, right? You don't want to shake the hands. You don't want to meet the people. That kind of stuff isn't his style. And look, I get it. There's plenty of people that have that kind of personality where it's like, look, I like people, but I'm not necessarily a people person. The difference is, we're not trying to run for president and he is. You can't have this, non-social personality and win people over. And what's funny about this is I sat right here doing fill-ins for David last August, and I predicted then, because I've been watching DeSantis as a resident of Florida, but I predicted at that time, if DeSantis ran for president, he would fizzle out. And this was part of the reason. He has no personality. He's a horrible debater. When those Republican debates come up, he is going to get toasted. And that may end up, dealing that death blow to his campaign. He's losing donors. He's not attracting small dollar donors. He is now third in the polls. The latest New Hampshire poll has him third. A public policy poll, national, came out recently, dropped him down to third in the Republican Party. He was at one point earlier this year the front runner. He was beating Trump in some polls earlier this year. That's a distant memory at this point. And it gets even worse because according to conservative strategist Sarah Longwell during a recent appearance on CNN, they've been conducting Republican focus groups. And Longwell pointed out that, there was a time not that long ago where DeSantis' name came up in every single focus group. If he wasn't the first one to come up, he'd be the second one right after Donald Trump. And this is what she says now in a recent interview with CNN. She says, I have to tell you, he has been getting killed in the focus groups, and it's not even that kind of criticism about him being a, non-social candidate. We always ask people, who do you want to see be the 2024 nominee? And 6 months ago, Ron DeSantis, he would always come up. He was the first one. If it wasn't Trump, it was him. People don't even mention him right now. We've had 2 groups in a row where nobody's even said his name. They've said Tim Scott. They've said Vivek Ramaswamy. And he's just not even getting mentioned. There was the one guy who liked him and he said, he's fine. He's fine. That is brutal, she concluded with. So he's not resonating with the voters. And the thing right now is his personality, right? It's the weird videos we get. It's his awkward interactions with people. And DeSantis actually had better hope that that is what people focus on. Because if we start focusing on his actual policy down here in the state of Florida, then he's going to get crushed even worse than he is right now. Like, it's one thing to be the awkward guy, but Republicans like your policies. But the second people start paying attention to what's actually happening down here in Florida, then he's toast. We've got malaria spreading. We have leprosy going through the state right now. Leprosy. We also have major insurance companies like Farron that have said, we're out. We're not going to represent people in the state of Florida anymore. So we're losing our homeowners insurance. We here in the state of Florida have had the fastest climbing home prices out of the entire country. We're still not the highest average home price, but we're rising faster than anyone else in the nation. All those stories about, we've had the massive migration, people just dying to come into Florida. Yep, well, that ignores the fact that we also had 457,000 people leave the state of Florida just last year alone. So things are not that great. The economic situation is horrible. In addition to the plagues of leprosy, malaria, and of course COVID going through the state, we also have boiling seas down in South Florida, essentially. Temperatures in the water have reached over 100 degrees, which is now leading to coral bleaching down in the Florida Keys, destroying a vital ecosystem, not just for nature, but also for tourism. Things are getting bad. We have construction sites left abandoned because of Ron DeSantis' anti-immigration legislation. He is destroying the state of Florida, and the Republicans in Tallahassee are more than happy to go along and give him whatever he wants. His fight with Disney, he came out this week and said, I'm moving on and they should drop the lawsuit. Yeah, you're moving on because you're getting crushed by the House of Mouse. That's what's happening. All of his other signature pieces of legislation, the anti-CRT bill, the Don't Say Gay bill, major portions of that legislation, of those pieces of legislation, have already been overturned by the courts. So he doesn't actually have the electoral victories, or the legislative victories, that he thinks he has. So he'd better pray that people only focus on how weird he is. Because when they start looking at his record, then he becomes an even worse person than just being the guy that eats pudding with his fingers. Listen, I am Farron Cousins. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and X at Farron Balanced. Find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Farron Balanced and youtube.com/The Ring of Fire. I'm sitting in for David Pakman, and we'll be right back.